The world, tens of thousands of years ago, was not the one we know today. It was silent, vast, and mercilessly cold. Snow-covered plains stretched endlessly beneath a sky of dull gray, where the sun shone faintly, offering no warmth. The wind screamed across the land, carrying shards of ice that could cut like knives. Herds of mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses trudged through the frostbitten earth, their heavy breaths turning instantly to mist. In this world of white desolation, survival was not guaranteed. It was a daily negotiation with death itself. The Ice Age had no mercy for the weak, and for early humans, every day was a fight against an invisible enemy, the cold. The climate was unrelenting. Massive glaciers advanced across continents, burying valleys and mountains under walls of ice. Rivers froze solid, forests disappeared beneath snow, and entire ecosystems were transformed. The temperature could drop to levels that made the air burn in the lungs. Nights were long, stretching endlessly under the pale glow of the moon, and when morning came, it brought no relief. This was a planet on the edge of extinction, where the boundaries between life and death were drawn in frost. For the early humans, life in this frozen wilderness meant constant adaptation. They were wanderers, small groups of hunter-gatherers who followed the movements of herds in search of food. But the winter changed everything. When blizzards howled and the land froze solid, the hunt became nearly impossible. Game animals vanished into deep valleys or perished in the storms, and the cold made weapons brittle and fingers numb. Without warmth, fire, or shelter, even the strongest could not last long. The Ice Age demanded more than courage. It demanded ingenuity. Imagine a small band of humans huddled at the mouth of a cave, their bodies wrapped in furs stiff with frost. Their faces are red and cracked from windburn, their eyes squinting against the glare of snow. Inside, a faint fire burns, a fragile flame struggling against the drafts that creep through cracks in the rock. Every breath forms a ghostly mist in the air, every movement a reminder of the cold waiting just beyond shadows. Outside, the howling wind seems alive, a beast prowling the landscape, waiting for them to falter. Inside, they cling to the flickering fire as if it were the heart of the world itself. In this frozen world, survival was not simply about strength. It was about knowledge. Early humans learned to read the land like a map of secrets. They tracked herds by faint prints in the snow, understood which trees burned the longest, and discovered where caves could block the wind. The cold forced them to think, to innovate, and to depend on one another in ways no species ever had before. Those who could not adapt perished. Those who learned, those who understood the rhythm of ice and fire, would become our ancestors. The Ice Age was not just a period of suffering. It was a crucible of evolution. The extreme conditions shaped the very core of humanity. Our need for cooperation, our ingenuity, and our ability to create tools, shelters, and meaning from the world around us. Fire became sacred not because it was beautiful, but because it was life itself. The faint glow of embers in a dark cave meant another night survived. Every spark was a defiance against the vast, cold emptiness outside. Yet for all their resilience, these early humans lived with constant fear. The line between survival and extinction was thin. A single storm could trap them in their shelters for days. A failed hunt could mean starvation. Frostbite, infection, and hunger were everyday threats. In their eyes, the world was not merely a place. It was a living, breathing force that tested them, punished them, and sometimes spared them. And in that eternal struggle, they began to see patterns. The rising smoke, the warmth of the fire, the shelter of stone. Slowly, instinct turned into understanding. The frozen earth held its own kind of beauty. The aurora shimmered faintly across the night sky, and the stillness of the snow-covered plains was broken only by the distant rumble of ice cracking over rivers. Beneath that frozen silence, humanity's story was being written. One spark, one shelter, one act of survival at a time. This was the dawn of adaptation, the moment when our species stood face to face with nature's most brutal test. From this struggle would emerge not only survival, but transformation. The Ice Age would teach early humans to master the elements, to use smoke to seal, fire to protect, and shelters to endure. It was in this frozen crucible that the foundations of civilization began. The world was locked in ice, but within those icy walls burned the first fires of human intelligence. And as the cold winds howled outside the caves, deep within, something extraordinary was happening. The species that had once merely endured the world was beginning to shape it. Before the first walls of cities rose, and before the first bricks were laid, humanity's earliest architecture began with fear, the need to survive a single night in the cold. For the Ice Age wanderer, shelter was not a luxury. It was the difference between waking to another sunrise or never waking at all. The forests and plains offered no safety. The open tundra, stripped of trees by the relentless frost, left humans exposed to both the claws of predators and the bite of freezing wind. In that brutal world, the instinct to find cover became as natural as breathing. The first shelters were born not from design, but desperation. At first, caves were nature's gift, hollow mouths in cliffs and mountains that offered protection from storms and beasts. Early humans learned to seek them, to recognize their shapes from afar, to feel the stone under their hands and know, here we live. Inside those caves, walls of limestone echoed with the crackle of fire and the whispers of survival. The flickering flames revealed crude paintings, lines and figures that told stories of hunts, births, and deaths. These were not decorations. They were memory, identity, and the first signs that humans were learning to make the world their own. But caves were not always enough. They were rare, often already home to other predators, bears, lions, or wolves. So the tribes learned to build. When the earth offered no refuge, humans began shaping it with their own hands. They gathered what the land provided: mammoth bones, hides, mud, branches, and stones, and created dwellings unlike anything the world had seen before. Archaeologists have uncovered extraordinary examples. At Mazyrik in Ukraine, a cluster of huts made entirely from mammoth bones and tusks, carefully stacked and bound with animal sinew. Hides were stretched over the frames, forming walls that could block the wind and trap heat. Inside, fire pits glowed, their smoke curling upward through small holes left in the roof. These were not mere shelters. They were the beginnings of architecture, symbols of intelligence, adaptation, and defiance against the elements. Imagine a winter storm sweeping across the tundra. The snow falls in endless sheets, covering everything in white silence. Through the haze, a faint orange light flickers from within a mound of bones and hides. Inside, a family crouches close to a hearth. A mother warms a small child's hands near the flames while two men patch cracks with strips of fur. The wind howls outside, but the inside is calm, dim, smoky alive. Every sound, every breath becomes sacred in that small world of warmth. That is the scene of humanity's first victory against nature, a fragile dome of survival standing proud against the storm. The materials may have been primitive, but the understanding was profound. Cavemen knew that warmth came not only from fire, but from the way air moved. They learned to block the wind with stones, to layer hides for insulation, and to dig shallow pits to capture rising heat. The science of shelter was born long before science had a name. Through trial and error, through freezing nights and failed constructions, they discovered what worked, and those who didn't learn didn't live to teach. In some regions, especially where mammoths were scarce, humans turned to other resources. They used large animal skulls as supports, packed snow and earth into walls, and even dug into the ground to create half-buried homes known as pit houses. These were insulated by the soil itself, nature's own barrier against the wind. Others built lean-tos using branches, bark, and grass, covered with hides. Over time, these shelters became more sophisticated, more intentional. People began to choose locations strategically, near water, away from predators, oriented toward the morning sun for warmth. It was no longer about hiding from the cold. It was about learning to live with it. But these shelters were more than survival tools. They were the first spaces that humans could call home. Around each hearth, a social order began to form. The warmth of the fire became a gathering point for stories, laughter, and teaching. Elders told tales of the hunt, mothers soothed children to sleep, and hunters repaired their tools by the dim orange glow. The concept of indoors, a space separated from nature's chaos, began here. Inside those walls, humanity discovered something greater than comfort, belonging. There was also a spiritual transformation. The act of building, of transforming bones and stones into protection, gave humans their first taste of creation. It mirrored nature itself, yet stood apart from it. In the rhythmic stacking of bones and the careful placement of stones, humans were not just surviving, they were shaping the world. Some shelters, archaeologists believe, were adorned with skulls or carved symbols, perhaps to ward off spirits or honor the animals that gave them life. Even then, survival and spirituality were intertwined. Over generations, these shelters evolved alongside human intelligence. Techniques were shared through stories and imitation. A clan that found a more efficient way to block drafts might pass that knowledge on to others. Slowly, regional building styles emerged. Huts, caves, dugouts, each adapted to the environment. In icy plains, insulation mattered most. In temperate regions, ventilation took priority. Each shelter was a mirror of its surroundings and its builder's understanding of the land. The creation of the first shelters was a turning point in human history. It marked the moment when instinct turned into innovation, when our ancestors learned that they could manipulate their environment rather than be victims of it. They took their first step toward civilization. Those crude, smoky huts of bone and fur were not primitive. They were masterpieces of survival engineering. They were monuments to the human will built in the face of extinction. As centuries passed and ice continued its grip on the world, humans grew wiser, braver, more skilled. They learned to seal cracks with smoke and fat, to build shelters that breathed but didn't freeze. They turned the wilderness into something livable, if only barely. Each structure stood as proof that even in the coldest, darkest corners of the earth, the spark of human creativity could not be extinguished. And so, amid endless blizzards and freezing winds, stone by stone and bone by bone, the first homes were born. They were small, fragile, and imperfect, but they carried within them the seeds of everything that would follow: warmth, family, memory, and hope. The first shelters were not just walls against the cold. They were the first whispers of civilization, the moment when humankind stopped merely enduring the world and began to shape it. Long before humans understood what fire truly was, they feared it. Lightning storms that split the sky would ignite forests in a blinding rage, and tribes would watch from afar, trembling, wide-eyed, in awe of the orange fury that devoured trees and beasts alike. Yet somewhere in that fear was fascination. For in the heart of that destruction lay warmth, light, and the promise of survival. Fire was both death and deliverance. To touch it was pain, but to master it was power. And in a frozen world where the cold claimed lives faster than predators, that power would change everything. It began as a discovery, not an invention. Our ancestors were observers of nature. They noticed how lightning, friction, or volcanic heat could bring flame into being. They watched how fire consumed and transformed, how it could turn meat tender, bones brittle, and darkness into day. The earliest humans, perhaps the Homo erectus of nearly 1,000,000 years ago, learned not to fear it entirely, but to contain it. A burning branch, carried carefully from a wildfire back to camp, could sustain warmth for days. At first, they did not create fire. They borrowed it, guarded it like treasure, and nurtured it like life itself. Picture them, a small group of early humans crouched around a glowing ember, hands shielding it from the biting wind. The storm outside screams, but their focus is on that single red spark. Every few moments, someone leans in to blow gently, coaxing the faint glow back to life. The fire is fragile, trembling like a living creature. They feed it dry grass, bits of bark, and slivers of wood. Slowly, the ember blooms into flame. For the first time, the darkness retreats. Their faces glow with orange light. And in that moment, something miraculous happens. Humanity meets warmth. The first fires were chaotic, smoky, and temperamental. Too much air, and they died. Too little, and they smothered themselves. But the reward was beyond measure. Fire dried damp hides, made bones easier to crack open for marrow, and most importantly, kept away the beasts that roamed the night. Lions, wolves, and cave bears that once stalked sleeping humans learned to keep their distance. The night, which had always belonged to predators, was suddenly divided, half for man, half for beasts. That was not just survival. It was conquest. Slowly, fire became more than a tool. It became a companion. Early humans learned to use it to cook, transforming raw, dangerous meat into digestible food. Smoke rose from their fires, curling through the entrances of caves and huts, carrying warmth but also an unexpected blessing. It kept insects and disease-bearing pests away. The smoke clung to walls and hides, sealing them, preserving them from moisture and decay. Without fully understanding it, these early people had discovered a form of natural technology. Fire, and especially smoke, was shaping their environment in ways that would echo across millennia. Yet with power came ritual. Fire was mysterious, a thing alive but not animal, consuming yet giving life. It danced and flickered like a spirit. The tribes began to treat it as sacred. They gathered around it at night, not only for heat, but for connection. It was here, in the firelight, that humanity's first conversations unfolded. Words, stories, laughter, all found their rhythm in the flicker of flames. The glow gave courage, and with courage came curiosity. People began experimenting, rubbing sticks, striking stones, learning to make sparks. The act of creating fire from nothing must have felt divine. For the first time, humans were not just followers of nature, they were its imitators. The mastery of fire was also a mastery of time. It allowed tribes to stay awake longer, to hunt and work beyond daylight. Fire extended the day and shortened the fearsome reach of the night. Its light brought safety, but also reflection. Around the hearth, humans began to look inward, to dream, to imagine, to question. They saw the shadows dance on cave walls and began painting their own, marking their stories in ochre and ash. Fire gave them not only warmth, but identity. But the lesson of fire was not only comfort. It was balance. Too much fire destroyed shelters and forests. Too little, and the cold crept back in. Managing flame became an art. Knowing how to breathe life into embers, how to control the smoke, how to keep the fire fed through the endless night. In this delicate relationship between flame and human, a deeper intelligence was forming, the birth of control. Every tribe that learned to harness fire gained an advantage. They could cook better, stay warmer, defend themselves more effectively, and travel further north into colder lands. Fire expanded the boundaries of where life could exist. And then there was smoke, that mysterious gray breath that rose from every flame. To early humans, it was the soul of the fire, a spirit escaping toward the heavens, but also had purpose. They learned that smoke could dry meat, repel insects, and fill cracks in hides to make them waterproof. Inside their shelters, they discovered something extraordinary. When smoke filled the air, it sealed the space, trapping warmth while keeping pests and moisture at bay. It was an invisible protector, turning caves and huts into insulated sanctuaries. What began as a byproduct of fire became an ally in its own right. Over time, fire was woven into every aspect of life. Hunters carried embers wrapped in bark to relight flames in distant camps. Women tended hearths like sacred altars, ensuring they never went out. Children learned early that the fire must be respected, fed gently, never smothered, never angered. To let it die was to risk death itself. The hearth became the center of the family, the first home. Its light symbolized survival, warmth, and unity. Even when entire tribes migrated across frozen plains, they carried their fire with them, the living heart of their people. Fire gave more than warmth. It gave humanity the means to evolve, to cook food that released more energy, to stay warm and live longer, to communicate and create culture. It was the first tool that shaped not just the environment, but the human mind. The glow of the flame illuminated more than the darkness outside. It lit the way for thought, language, and imagination. It was through the smoke and the spark that humans took their first steps toward civilization. And so, from the fear of a lightning strike came the birth of mastery. The cold had once ruled the world, but now man had found its answer. Fire was the bridge between survival and understanding, between the animal and the human. Its smoke rose into the frozen sky like a message. Mankind had found its light. The Ice Age did not forgive mistakes. A single crack in a shelter wall, a forgotten vent, or a mismanaged fire could decide who lived and who froze before dawn. For early humans, smoke was more than a byproduct of fire. It was a mysterious ally that quietly protected them from the cold, disease, and decay. While flames offered light and warmth, it was the unseen hand of smoke that preserved life through the harshest winters. The ancients didn't know the chemistry behind it, but through generations of instinct and observation, they discovered something remarkable. Smoke could seal, strengthen, and safeguard their fragile homes. When the first shelters rose, crude huts of bone, hide, and mud, they were far from perfect. Wind would slip through every gap, and snow would melt through roofs, chilling everything inside. The fire burned constantly, but so did the drafts, stealing away the heat as fast as it was made. And yet, over time, the people began to notice a strange pattern. The shelters that filled with smoke, those dark, suffocating interiors that stung the eyes and coated everything in soot, somehow stayed warmer, drier, and safer than the ones that remained clean and clear. What seemed like an inconvenience was in truth a natural miracle. The process was simple but profound. As smoke rose from the hearth, it drifted upward, clinging to every surface it touched. Tiny particles of soot settled into cracks between stones, sticks, and hides, sealing them more effectively than mud or clay alone. Over time, the constant exposure hardened the materials, forming a protective layer that blocked wind and moisture. The more shelter smoked, the tighter and warmer it became. To the modern mind, it might seem accidental, but for early humans, it was wisdom earned through generations of survival. Smoke became their first form of insulation. Inside these smoky dens, the air was thick and heavy. The walls darkened, the ceilings turned black, and every breath carried the acrid tang of burning wood and fat. Yet despite the discomfort, there was safety in that haze. It kept insects and rodents away, deterred predators from entering, and even preserved food hanging from the rafters. Dried fish, meat, and hides cured slowly in the smoky air, their surfaces hardened and protected from rot. What fire began, smoke completed. It was invisible armor for both body and home. Imagine a winter night deep in the Ice Age. Outside, the wind howls across the tundra, sweeping snow against the side of a mammoth bone hut. Inside, the glow of the fire flickers weakly, its flames almost invisible behind a veil of blue-gray smoke. A woman sits near the entrance, her face streaked with soot, mending a fur cloak. Nearby, meat hangs from a wooden frame, turning darker as it dries. Children cough softly in their sleep, but they are alive, wrapped in warmth, protected by smoke. The smell of wood and fat fills the air, harsh yet comforting. Every breath carries with it the essence of survival. Without realizing it, these early humans had mastered a kind of primitive science, the chemistry of smoke. Modern researchers understand now that the carbon particles in smoke create a barrier that resists moisture and bacteria. It is antimicrobial, insect-repelling, and preservative all at once. The people of the Ice Age did not know these words, but they knew the results. They learned to keep fires burning constantly, allowing smoke to saturate every part of their shelters. Even their clothes, hair, and skin carried that smoky scent, a mark of endurance, an unspoken connection to the fire that kept them alive. There was also strategy in the way smoke was used. Some tribes built small vents or cracks in the roof, allowing just enough air to escape without losing heat. The smoke circulated, spreading warmth evenly through the room before slipping out into the night. In places where no caves existed, people dug shallow pits in the ground and built roofs over them, trapping smoke within the lower walls. These underground shelters were dark, smoky, and suffocating, but in a world frozen solid, they were miracles of engineering. Smoke was not only practical, it became symbolic. It was the breath of the fire, the spirit of the hearth. When the smoke rose from a camp, it signaled life within. From far away, travelers could spot the thin gray trails winding into the sky and know, humans are here, alive, enduring. Smoke became a sign of community, of safety, of defiance against the ice. It connected clans across the landscape, a silent message shared through the air itself. The relationship between fire, smoke, and shelter changed the course of human history. It allowed our ancestors to settle in regions once thought uninhabitable. The frozen plains of Siberia, the icy valleys of Europe, and the harsh tundras of the north. Smoke-sealed huts meant warmth could be trapped and sustained even during endless storms. What began as a natural accident evolved into deliberate construction. Over generations, people learned to hang wet hides near the ceiling to let smoke cure them faster. They positioned sleeping areas near the hearth, but slightly elevated, to avoid the densest air while still staying warm. Everything in their environment became part of an intricate system of survival perfected by observation and necessity. But life in the smoke came at a cost. Eyes burned, throats ached, and lungs filled with soot. There were moments when the air grew too thick, forcing families to crawl outside just to breathe. Yet even then, no one dared extinguish the fire. The pain of smoke was small compared to the agony of cold. They endured it willingly, knowing that the haze above them meant life. In their minds, smoke was both a curse and a blessing, a teacher that punished recklessness but rewarded wisdom. The wisdom of smoke stretched beyond the practical. Some tribes believed that smoke carried their prayers to the heavens, rising like whispers to unseen gods. Others saw it as the spirit of ancestors, moving between worlds. It was sacred because it gave warmth, sacred because it saved lives. Every puff of gray that rose from a hearth was a promise that no matter how harsh the world became, humans would endure. In the end, smoke did more than seal their shelters. It sealed their fate as survivors. It taught them how to transform the hostile world into a livable one. It bridged the gap between nature's cruelty and human invention. Through smoke, they learned that even the unseen could be harnessed, that safety could come not from what you hold, but from what surrounds you. And as centuries passed, the lesson endured. From the dark caves of Europe to the frozen plains of Asia, every curl of smoke that rose into the gray sky told the same ancient story of humanity learning, adapting, and surviving. It was the breath of the earth and the whisper of fire. In that delicate dance between warmth and air, between flame and frost, the first science of survival was born, the art of sealing life itself within a veil of smoke. Winter for the cavemen was not just a season. It was a test of willpower, cunning, and endurance. When the world froze, food disappeared as if swallowed by the snow itself. The lush valleys that once teemed with animals turned into vast, lifeless plains of white. Rivers froze solid, berries vanished, and the once abundant herds migrated far away in search of warmth. For the humans who stayed behind, survival meant facing an unforgiving truth. Every meal had to be earned through blood, patience, and the raw instinct to kill or die trying. Hunting during winter was nothing like hunting in the fertile seasons. In spring and summer, animals roamed freely, distracted by abundance. But in winter, Every creature was cautious, starving, desperate, and equally dangerous. The hunter and the hunted became reflections of each other, driven by the same hunger. For early humans, the chase began not with strength, but with strategy. They had no guns, no advanced tools, only sharpened stones, bone-tipped spears, and the intelligence that separated them from the beasts they pursued. The world was silent when they hunted. Snow absorbed every sound, muting footsteps and muffling breath. The hunters moved like shadows, wrapped in furs that blended with the landscape. Every step was calculated, every sound measured. A single crunch too loud could scatter the herd, wasting precious energy and time. These hunts were not reckless charges. They were long, deliberate dances between life and death. Early humans relied heavily on teamwork. Alone, one hunter could never take down a mammoth or even a deer in deep snow. But together, they became a force of nature. They learned to communicate without words, with gestures, nods, and the faintest whistles. Each person knew their role. One would drive the prey toward an ambush. Others would wait with spears poised behind icy boulders or hidden pits. Timing was everything. When the moment came, they struck as one, releasing a fury born from hunger and fear. Sometimes the hunts stretched for days. They tracked wounded animals through blizzards, following trails of blood that froze crimson against the snow. The hunters themselves were starving, their muscles trembling from exhaustion, their breath turning to ice. Yet they never gave up. The knowledge that one kill could feed the entire group for weeks kept them going. When they finally brought down their prey, whether it was a reindeer, bison, or woolly mammoth, it was more than victory. It was salvation. The aftermath of a successful hunt was both gruesome and sacred. The tribe gathered around the fallen animal, their faces lit by flickering torches. The air was filled with steam and blood, the snow stained with red. They worked quickly, cutting the meat before it froze solid, saving every piece, flesh, bone, sinew, fat. Nothing was wasted. The thick hide became clothing or tent coverings. Bones were shaped into weapons. Tendons became strong cords. Even the stomach was cleaned and used to carry water or food. To waste any part of the kill was unthinkable, an insult to both the animal and the gods of survival. Fire played its part again here. The hunters roasted the first pieces of meat on the spot, letting the hot fat drip and sizzle. That first bite after days of hunger was divine, smoky, oily, filled with life itself. The warmth of the fire mixed with the heat of victory, and for a few precious hours, they felt almost invincible. The crackle of flames, the smell of roasted meat, and the laughter of those who lived to see another day filled the frozen air. It was not just a meal, it was a celebration of endurance. But every success was balanced by tragedy. Many hunts ended in silence. No food, no victory, only loss. The Ice Age was cruel. The weak fell quickly. Sometimes hunters vanished into the white wilderness, swallowed by storms or killed by the very animals they pursued. The tribe would wait for days, staring at the horizon, praying to see their figures return through the snow. When they did not, their spears were planted in the ice as silent memorials. Survival had a price, and it was always paid in flesh, human or beast. The knowledge of hunting evolved over generations. The cavemen began studying animal tracks more closely, learning the difference between the imprint of a wolf and a deer, between fresh trails and those left hours earlier. They discovered that wind direction could betray them, that scent carried far in cold air. They learned to move with the rhythm of the land, to wait for dawn when the frost was hardest, to ambush near frozen rivers where thirsty animals gathered. Hunting became not just instinct, but a science, a sacred craft passed from elders to children beside the fire. They also learned to build traps, pits covered with branches, snares made from tendons, and walls of ice that funneled herds into killing zones. These innovations showed a remarkable leap in human intelligence. Each improvement meant fewer deaths, more food, and longer survival. The humans were no longer merely reacting to nature. They were mastering it. They had begun to bend the frozen wilderness to their will, one hunt at a time. And yet, no matter how clever or organized they became, hunger remained their greatest enemy. There were winters so harsh that no prey could be found. During those times, the people turned to desperate measures: boiling bones for the last traces of fat, eating frozen leather, or gnawing on roots found beneath the snow. In the darkest moments, when even the fires burned low and the wind screamed outside, they would whisper stories of past hunts, reminding themselves that they had overcome worse before. Hope, like fire, had to be kept alive. In those endless winters, hunting was more than survival. It was identity. The hunt defined who they were, bound them together, and gave meaning to their suffering. Each scar, each frozen night, each drop of blood spilled on the snow told the story of humanity's relentless fight against extinction. They hunted not just for food, but for existence, for the right to remain part of the living world. The frozen silence of the Ice Age was merciless, but in that silence, humans found their purpose. They learned patience, unity, and courage. They became strategists, engineers, and warriors all at once. Each hunt was a gamble with death, but it was through those gambles that humanity sharpened its edge. The blood spilled on the ice was the price of evolution, the cost of survival. And as the last light of day vanished behind the snow-covered hills, the tribe gathered once more around their fire. The meat roasted, smoke curled into the night, and stories of the hunt echoed across the icy plains. In that flickering light, surrounded by cold and darkness, they were not just survivors. They were the masters of the frozen world they refused to surrender to. Long before civilization had walls or kings, the first true victory of humankind was fire. It was not discovered in comfort, but in terror. A lightning strike splitting an ancient tree, flames devouring the forest, animals fleeing in panic, and there, in the glow, early humans stood trembling. The fire was alive, unpredictable, and powerful. It burned, it roared, it destroyed. Yet somewhere in that chaos, a realization was born. This wild force could be tamed, controlled, and used. And once it was, nothing on Earth would ever challenge human dominance again. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, fire was not a luxury. It was the difference between life and extinction. When the temperature dropped below freezing and icy winds howled through valleys, even the thickest furs could not protect against the cold. The night was a living predator creeping into their bones. But fire, the strange golden light born from smoke and wood, created a circle of warmth that turned fear into safety. The flames were more than heat, they were hope. Creating that fire, however, was no simple task. For early humans, it was an art that bordered on magic. They had no matches, no flint lighters, only the raw materials nature offered. Some learned to strike certain stones together, flint against pyrite, producing sparks that leapt like stars on a dry moss. Others discovered the bow drill, spinning a wooden spindle so fast that friction itself birthed an ember. Each attempt demanded patience, skill, and reverence. A single spark was treated like a newborn, fragile, precious, and capable of giving life. Once the flame caught, they nurtured it carefully, feeding it bits of bark, twigs, and grass until it grew into a living fire. The moment that first flame burst to life was sacred. The tribe would gather around it, eyes glowing in the orange light, hearts filled with awe. For them, fire was more than a tool. It was a divine companion, a spirit that had chosen to live among them. In the harshest winters, this spirit became their god. Around the fire, life began to change. Darkness no longer meant blindness. The flicker of flames illuminated cave walls, revealing their art, painted hunts, handprints, and symbols that spoke of dreams and fears. Fire turned night into day, allowing conversation, storytelling, and laughter long after the sun had died. It brought warmth to frozen bodies, comfort to frightened children, and unity to small, scattered tribes. The fire was a gathering place, a heart of light in a world of ice. But its magic extended beyond warmth. Fire transformed the way humans ate, hunted, and lived. Cooking meat over open flames made it softer, safer, and more nourishing. The heat killed parasites and made fat melt into rich, energy-dense food, a vital resource in the freezing cold. This new method of eating didn't just fill bellies, it fueled evolution. Cooked food required less energy to digest, allowing the human body to use that energy for something else, the growth of the brain. Fire didn't just warm their bodies, it ignited their minds. They also learned that smoke itself had power. By hanging meat above the fire, they discovered that smoke preserved it, keeping it from rotting. Suddenly, food could last days, even weeks, a miracle in an age where hunger stalked every night. Smoke became a silent protector, sealing the flavor of survival into every piece of meat. That discovery meant freedom. The freedom to move, to plan, to endure the endless winter without starving. Fire also changed the balance between humans and predators. Before fire, the night belonged to beasts, wolves, cave lions, and saber-toothed cats that prowled unseen. But once the flames were lit, the roles reversed. The predators feared the light. They circled in the darkness but dared not cross its glow. The fire's crackle became a warning, a promise that humans were no longer prey. Those glowing embers marked the beginning of dominance, a silent declaration that mankind had found its first weapon. But as with all power, fire demanded respect. Mishandled, it could turn against its masters. A single ember dropped on dry grass could consume a camp, driving tribes into the cold once more. Children were taught early to treat fire like a living thing, to feed it, protect it, and never anger it. For them, it was alive. It breathed air, devoured wood, and slept when starved. They believed that fire came from the gods of the sky, a gift stolen by courage or granted by mercy. To lose it was to lose divine favor. Rituals began to form around the flame. Before sleeping, they would add fresh wood, whispering small prayers. When someone died, their bodies were sometimes placed near firelight, symbolizing the journey of their spirit from warmth to the stars. In these moments, fire was no longer just a physical force. It was woven into their faith, their mythology, their very sense of existence. It became the bridge between the living and the eternal. Over generations, mastery of fire led to innovation. They learned how to control smoke to drive animals out of burrows, to harden wooden spear tips, and even to light torches for exploring deep caves. The flicker of flame on stone walls guided them into the unknown, revealing not only the darkness around them, but also the mysteries within. Fire became a companion in exploration, a symbol of the human spirit's refusal to be swallowed by the night. Yet, the most profound impact of fire was psychological. Before its discovery, humans lived in constant fear of darkness, that vast, unknowable void filled with unseen threats. Fire changed that. It gave them control over something primal, light itself. The flickering glow of flames danced not only on their faces, but in their minds. It sparked imagination, storytelling, and memory. Around those fires, humanity found its voice. The first myths, the first songs, the first dreams of gods and heroes, all were born in the circle of firelight. And so, night after night, as the ice age raged outside, the cavemen sat around their fires, silent, thoughtful, sometimes laughing, sometimes mourning. The snow howled beyond the caves, but within the circle of light, they were untouchable. The fire crackled, smoke rose to the heavens, and sparks drifted like stars into the black sky. Each spark was a promise that as long as the flame burned, so too would the spirit of mankind. The art of fire was more than survival. It was the first declaration of independence, a moment when humanity stopped merely enduring nature and began to shape it. From this single discovery would grow everything, from metalwork to cities, from language to religion. It all began here, with frightened hands trembling before a flame that would one day illuminate the entire world. In the icy wilderness of the prehistoric world, survival began with a single question: Where could one escape the cold? Fire gave warmth, but without shelter, that warmth vanished into the howling wind. The cavemen learned quickly that even the fiercest flames could not stand against the relentless winter alone. They needed walls, something to hold in the heat, block the wind, and protect their fragile lives from both nature and predators. And so began humanity's earliest art of architecture, the creation of shelter from earth, stone, and imagination. At first, nature provided the answers. Caves were gifts from the earth itself, hollowed chambers carved by time, dark and silent, yet offering safety from the elements. These were the first homes, sacred and mysterious. When the storms came, the tribes would retreat deep inside, lighting fires at the entrance to drive out both darkness and wild beasts. The stone walls kept the heat trapped inside, and the rising smoke curled toward the cracks in the ceiling, leaving the air thick with a warm, earthy scent. For the first time, humans found a place they could call theirs, a sanctuary carved by nature but claimed by will. But not all lands had caves, and not all tribes could find such perfect refuge. Many were forced to invent their own shelters from nothing but raw materials and determination. They gathered branches, bones, hides, and mud, turning chaos into structure. The earliest huts were crude domes, built from mammoth ribs and covered with animal skins stitched together with sinew. The seams were sealed with mud and even smoke, which hardened the outer layers and kept the wind from slipping through. It was in these smoky, dim shelters that humankind learned the delicate balance between warmth and breath. The air inside these shelters was thick and heavy. Fire was both friend and threat, its warmth vital, its smoke suffocating. Yet cavemen were not careless. They became masters of managing the breath of their dwellings. They discovered that smoke could be guided, that by building small openings near the top of their huts or by creating cracks in the rocks above their fires, they could draw out the smoke while keeping in the heat. Over time, this became more than survival. It became design. The idea of a hearth, a heart of the home, was born in these smoky chambers. Smoke itself became a tool. When storms made the air cold and damp, they would fill the huts with heavy smoke before sealing the entrances. The smoke seeped into the walls, drying them, preserving them, and even killing insects and pests hidden in the furs and wood. The process was suffocating but effective. They would sit outside while the shelter smoked, watching dark plumes curl into the air like breath from the earth. When they returned, the air inside was clearer, warmer, and filled with the scent of survival. To the cavemen, building a shelter was not just construction, it was creation. Every stick, every hide, every stone was placed with meaning. The floor was layered with grass and moss, creating insulation from the frozen ground. In the center burned a small fire, carefully controlled, its embers glowing like the heart of a beast. Around it, they arranged sleeping furs, food supplies, and tools. The walls told stories, painted hands, animals, symbols scratched into stone. These shelters became more than protection from cold. They became reflections of the human spirit, warm, defiant, alive. The act of building itself brought people together. Men, women, and even children played their parts. Some gathered stones and wood, others stitched hides, while the elders taught where the wind would strike hardest and how to angle walls to deflect it. Cooperation was survival. Alone, one might freeze. Together, they built warmth. In this shared effort, humanity's sense of community deepened. Each shelter was not just a home, but a symbol of unity, proof that together they could outsmart the cruelty of nature. And as the shelters grew more complex, so did their craftsmanship. They learned to dig shallow pits before setting up fires, allowing cold air to sink and heat to circulate. Some tribes constructed double walls with grass stuffed in between, creating primitive insulation. Others discovered that a thin layer of animal fat rubbed on hides could make them waterproof, keeping out melting snow. Every winter brought new lessons, failures and triumphs written in smoke and frost. Slowly, the art of shelter became one of the most sacred traditions passed from generation to generation. But shelters were not only for living. they were also for dreaming. Inside, by the dim flicker of firelight, humans began to decorate their surroundings. On the walls of caves like Cavemen and Lascaux, they painted images of hunts, animals, and spirits, perhaps as prayers, perhaps as memories. These painted walls turned cold stone into storytelling, transforming their shelters into temples of imagination. The firelight made the painted beasts seem to move, their shadows dancing with life. In that sacred flicker, the boundary between the physical and the spiritual blurred. Smoke, in particular, was seen as mystical, a bridge between worlds. It rose upward, vanishing into cracks in sky, carrying with it prayers, fears, and gratitude. When a hunt was successful, they burned certain herbs or grasses to send thanks to the spirits. When a storm threatened their home, they added wet moss to the fire, letting the heavy smoke fill the air like an offering. To them, smoke was not pollution, it was language. It was the breath of the earth speaking back to the heavens. Over time, these shelters became symbols of resilience. Each one, no matter how small or crude, represented defiance against extinction. In a world of predators, storms, and endless cold, the simple act of building a warm space was an act of rebellion. It said, "We are still here. We will endure." And each night, as the snow fell and the wind screamed outside, the cavemen huddled within their smoky shelters, wrapped in furs, listening to the crackle of fire and the heartbeat of survival. For the children, these smoky, glowing rooms were the entire universe. They fell asleep to the scent of burning wood and the rhythm of their parents' whispers. The smoke curled around them like a guardian spirit, its tendrils painting dreams across their minds, dreams of hunts, of sunlight, of seasons yet to come. Within those humble shelters, humanity found not only warmth but something far greater, the sense of belonging, of home. And so, the cavemen's smoky shelters became the womb of civilization. Within those walls of stone, bone, and fire, the foundations of human life, cooperation, invention, belief, were born. The smoke that once stung their eyes and filled their lungs became the very symbol of human persistence. It was proof that even in the darkest, coldest corners of the Ice Age, mankind had learned to turn suffering into creation and isolation into warmth. Outside, the night raged on, the snow endless and cruel. But within those smoky shelters, a quiet miracle burned. Humanity, fragile yet unbroken, had learned how to build its own small pocket of eternity, one flame, one stone, one breath of smoke at a time. Each dawn in the Ice Age began with silence, a silence so complete it pressed against the ears like weight. The world was frozen solid, wrapped in endless sheets of white and gray. The sun was weak and distant, rising like a pale ghost above the horizon. Frost coated everything, trees, stones, the furs that covered sleeping bodies. Before the first fire crackled to life, before the first word was spoken, the cold itself seemed alive, creeping into bones, biting at flesh, whispering through cracks in the shelter. Every day was a battle, and the enemy was invisible but relentless. The cavemen's greatest war was not with beasts or hunger, but with the cold that sought to claim them one breath at a time. Surviving the cold was not an act of comfort. It was an act of endurance. When temperatures dropped to levels that could freeze exposed skin within minutes, every movement mattered. People learned to move slowly, deliberately, conserving energy. They layered themselves in thick furs stitched together with sinew, wrapping their feet in dry grass and hide to keep the frost from devouring their toes. Their breath hung in the air like smoke, proof that life still existed in a world that seemed determined to erase it. The first task of every morning was to wake the fire. The ashes from the previous night's flame were carefully stirred, searching for a hidden ember, the small glowing heart that had survived the night. If found, it was fed with dry moss, bark, and breath until it flared back to life. If not, panic followed. Without fire, the shelter would grow cold in minutes, and the people would face death long before the sun reached its highest point. Fire was not just warmth. It was time, a way to delay the cold's inevitable return. Their diet also had to bend to the demands of the ice. Every calorie was a weapon in this war. Meat was their lifeline, fat their fuel. The cavemen prized the oily marrow within bones, cracking them open with stones to drink the warmth inside. Fat burned slow and steady in the body, like an internal fire. The leaner the winter grew, the more precious that fat became. Sometimes they mixed animal grease with snow, creating crude energy paste just to survive another day. The very idea of waste was unthinkable. Every scrap of hide, every drop of oil, every shard of bone had a purpose. Water, too, was a challenge. Rivers froze solid, and snow alone could not sustain them. Eating too much of it drained the body's warmth. So they learned to melt ice slowly beside the fire, collecting droplets in animal skins. This daily ritual, feeding the flame, melting water, drying hides, mending tools, was the rhythm of their existence. It was a constant cycle of fighting back the cold, of refusing to be swallowed by the frost. At night, the cold became something monstrous. The wind screamed across the plains, rattling the walls of their shelters like a living beast. The people huddled together, body against body, trading heat through closeness. Children slept between parents, wrapped in layers of fur and animal skin. The fire burned low, its glow faint but steady, casting trembling shadows on the walls. Sleep was shallow and restless. Every creak or gust of wind could mean danger. Yet even as they shivered and dreamed of warmth, they whispered stories of the sun's return, of ancestors who had survived colder winters, of spirits who protected them through the dark. The cold also changed the way they thought, worked, and felt. Hands grew numb, breath turned to mist, and every task became slower, heavier. Carving tools, sharpening blades, or even eating required patience and pain. Fingers cracked and bled, lips split open, and frostbite claimed many who strayed too far from the fire. Yet somehow, through pain and persistence, they adapted. They learned to sense the weather before it came, to read the clouds, the wind, the smell of the air. A sudden drop in silence, a certain texture in the frost, warned them that a storm was near. They became meteorologists of survival, reading nature with an instinct deeper than words. But the battle was not only physical. The cold attacked the mind as well. In the long nights when the sun disappeared for weeks, when even time seemed frozen, despair crept in. The endless whiteness was beautiful yet cruel. It numbed emotion, blurred memory, and made people question whether warmth would ever return. Depression and exhaustion were silent predators. To fight them, the cavemen turned to ritual and imagination. They told stories of summer hunts, of green lands far away, of fire spirits that promised rebirth. These stories were not mere distractions. They were shields against hopelessness. Some days, they faced storms so fierce that even breath became pain. Snow fell so thickly that vision vanished, the world reduced to a white blur. When caught in such storms, they learned to crouch low, wrapping themselves in furs, waiting for the fury to pass. Many didn't. Those who did emerged like ghosts, covered in ice, their eyelashes frozen, their limbs stiff. Yet even then, they pressed on, driven by the same stubborn instinct that had carried humanity through every trial, the refusal to die quietly. The relationship between man and cold became one of grim respect. They could not defeat it, but they could outlast it. They learned to build windbreaks from snow itself, thick walls that insulated instead of froze. They packed hides with dried grass for bedding, built layers of rock around their fire pits to hold heat longer, and even learned how to warm stones and place them under sleeping furs. Small innovations, born from desperation, became traditions passed down through generations. To them, the cold was not an enemy to be hated, but a teacher to be endured. It shaped their minds, strengthened their resolve, and carved discipline into their lives. They learned humility, that survival was not about conquering nature, but about coexisting with it. Each victory was temporary, each day a borrowed grace. Yet every morning they lit their fires again, knowing that the war would never end, but that they could still win, one breath, one flame, one heartbeat at a time. And when the first signs of spring finally appeared, the snow softening, the rivers sighing open, the first bird cries echoing through the valleys, the people did not celebrate wildly. They simply watched in quiet wonder, as if witnessing a promise kept. The war with the cold had not been won, only survived. But in surviving, they had proven something eternal. That warmth was not merely a gift of nature, but a creation of the human spirit. The silent war with the cold defined them, hardened them, and, in a strange way, made them who they were. For in that endless struggle, they discovered what it truly meant to be alive, to fight, to endure, and to never let the flame go out, no matter how fierce the winter became. When the world turned white and silent, the hunt became both a necessity and a nightmare. In the frozen wilderness of the Ice Age, food was life, and to find it meant stepping into a battlefield ruled by nature itself. The cold had stripped the land bare. Rivers were locked under ice. Trees stood skeletal and still, and the herds that once roamed freely had vanished into distant valleys. The cavemen could no longer rely on easy hunts. Every step through the snow demanded calculation. Every movement risked exposure. Yet hunger did not wait. To feed their tribe, the hunters had to face the frost, the beasts, and death itself. The first challenge was tracking prey. In winter, animals moved less and hid more. Their tracks in the snow were the only clues, faint, fragile, easily erased by wind. Cavemen became masters of reading these marks. A broken twig, a faint print, a tuft of fur caught in the bark, each told a story. They learned to distinguish between the heavy, dragging footprints of mammoths and the light, cautious steps of deer. To follow those signs required patience and silence. Even a single crunch of snow underfoot could send prey fleeing across miles of frozen plain. The hunters worked in small groups, often 3 to 6 men. Moving like shadows, they communicated with gestures and glances. Speech was rare during a hunt. The air carried sound too far. They dressed in layered furs, blending into the color of snow and bark. Spears, stone-tipped and hardened in fire, were their main weapons. Some carried throwing sticks or crude bows, though these were difficult to use in the cold. Each tool had to be prepared carefully. A dull point or a loose binding could mean starvation. Their prey varied with the season. Mammoths and woolly rhinos were prizes beyond measure. Their meat, hide, and fat could feed and clothe the whole tribe. But these giants were also dangerous. To face them was to face a living mountain. The hunters would study herds for days, waiting for a moment of weakness, an injured calf, a straggling old bull. Then, using coordination and cunning, they would drive the beast toward traps or icy ravines, where it would lose balance and fall. The ground would tremble as the animal crashed, its cries echoing through the valley. The kill was brutal, but it meant life. Smaller game like reindeer, horses, and musk oxen were hunted more often. These required stealth and speed. The hunters would surround the animals silently, pushing them toward narrow passes or cliffs. Sometimes they used snowdrifts as cover, crawling on their bellies for hours to get close enough to strike. Each throw of a spear carried weight. If it missed, the prey escaped, and the tribe went hungry. Every drop of sweat, every bruise, every frostbitten finger was part of this ancient economy of survival. But not every hunt ended in triumph. The snow hid dangers as well as prey. Thin ice could swallow a hunter whole. Sudden storms could erase all direction, leaving men to wander blindly until exhaustion claimed them. There were predators too: wolves, cave lions, and saber-toothed cats. These creatures hunted the same prey, and sometimes the hunters themselves. It was not uncommon for man and beast to stalk one another unknowingly through the snow, each hungry, each desperate. Many hunts ended not with a feast, but with the return of only a few, the rest taken by the cold or by fangs. When a kill was finally made, the work had only begun. The carcass had to be skinned and cut before it froze solid. Every hand joined the effort, using sharp flint knives to slice through hide and flesh. The meat was carried back to camp in bundles, sometimes dragged on sleds made from branches and bones. The hunter's return was always a moment of quiet victory. Smoke rising from the campfire, children running to meet them, the tribe gathering to share the warmth and the story of the hunt. Nothing was wasted. The hide became clothing and shelter. The bones became tools and weapons. The sinews were used for stitching and binding. The fat was rendered into oil for lamps. Even the skulls were sometimes kept as symbols of strength or gratitude, a silent tribute to the creature that gave its life so others might live. Around the fire, the hunters would tell the tale, not to boast, but to remember. Each story carried a lesson, a warning, a reminder of how thin the line between hunter and hunted truly was. Through every hunt, the cavemen refined something deeper than skill, instinct. They learned to listen to the land, to sense movement through air, to feel the rhythm of the chase. The hunt became more than survival. It was a ritual, a connection to the earth that sustained them. Each heartbeat in the snow, each breath of cold air, reminded them that life was fragile, but also fierce, beautiful, and worth fighting for. In the end, hunting in the snow was not merely about killing. It was about balance. Man against nature, hunger against mercy, fire against frost. The cavemen did not see themselves as masters of the wild, but as part of its eternal cycle. The snow tested them, the beasts fed them, and the struggle defined them. And so, in every frozen dawn when they stepped out with spears in hand, they carried not only the hope of food, but the burning flame of life itself. In the heart of winter, when the world turned into a frozen tomb, fire was not just warmth. It was survival, spirit, and safety. For the cavemen, the flame was sacred. It stood between life and death, between the paralyzing grip of frost and the comfort of breath. The first spark that flickered in the darkness was more than light. It was hope made visible. Around that small circle of warmth, families gathered close, watching the fire dance as the wind howled outside their shelters. Creating fire in such harsh conditions was never easy. The cold stole moisture from their hands, the wood was often damp, and even a small gust could snuff out their efforts. But these ancient survivors had learned through endless trial. Flint stones struck together, sending tiny sparks into nests of dried grass, moss, or animal fur. They blew gently, nurturing the ember until it caught. When the flame finally took life, a deep silence often fell, a moment of reverence for this fragile miracle that defied the cold. Once the fire burned steady, it became the center of existence. Every shelter, whether a cave, a hut of branches, or a snow-covered pit, revolved around it. The fire provided light to work by, heat to sleep by, and protection from prowling predators. The smoke kept insects and disease away, and its scent marked their territory, warning other creatures, and sometimes rival tribes, to keep distance. But even more importantly, smoke became a tool of survival. Cavemen discovered that sealing their shelters with smoke helped preserve warmth. They learned to let the smoke drift through cracks and openings, creating a thin layer of heat-trapping residue. It coated the inside of caves, darkening the stone walls, reducing air leaks, and keeping the bitter wind at bay. Over time, they realized that certain woods produced thicker, oilier smoke, ideal for sealing. It was primitive insulation, crafted through pure observation and necessity. But the fire's purpose reached beyond practicality. It carried spiritual power. To them, fire was alive, a spirit that ate, breathed, and needed care. It could grow wild if left untended or die if neglected. Every member of the tribe had a role in keeping it alive, feeding it twigs, watching over it through the night. Children learned early that fire demanded respect. To lose it in the dead of winter could mean the end of everyone. At night, When the wind howled and snow buried the world outside, the tribe gathered around the flames. Their shadows danced on the walls, their faces flickering between light and dark. Here they told stories of hunts, of spirits, of ancestors who had first tamed fire. The crackle of burning wood became their song, the smoke their prayer. Within that fragile circle of warmth, humanity was born, sharing, teaching, remembering. Fire united them. It turned fear into courage, chaos into ritual. It gave them not only heat, but also identity, a symbol of intelligence, will, and endurance. Long before cities and civilization, it was this simple flame that taught humans what it meant to create, to protect, and to believe. Even as the Ice Age pressed its icy hand upon the world, the fire burned, a defiant reminder that life, though fragile, would always find a way to keep glowing. Long before bricks and walls, before roofs or chimneys, the cavemen learned the most ancient form of architecture, survival. Their homes were not built for comfort, but for endurance. Each shelter was a small victory against the merciless cold, a space carved out of the wilderness where fire could live, children could sleep, and the tribe could breathe without fear of freezing. When winter came, building and maintaining these shelters became an art of life and death. Their first homes were often caves, naturally formed sanctuaries carved by rivers and time. These offered protection from storms, beasts, and the bitter wind. But not every tribe was lucky enough to find one. For those who wandered across plains and tundra, they had to create shelter with their own hands. They used what the land offered: bones, hides, stones, branches, and snow itself. The mammoth bones were especially valuable. Their size and strength made them perfect as frames for huts. Over these skeleton-like structures, they stretched layers of thick hides, sealing gaps with moss, clay, or mud. Each joint and corner was reinforced to keep out the wind's sharp edge. Inside, they created zones, a place for fire in the center, sleeping areas along the walls, and storage spaces near the entrance. The ground was often covered with animal skins and dry grass, creating a barrier against the frozen earth. The heat from the fire rose and spread slowly, caught by the hide walls, forming a cocoon of warmth. Sometimes they built small smoke vents in the roof, allowing just enough air to escape so they could breathe without losing all their heat. For tribes living in regions without caves or large bones, the snow itself became shelter. They crafted primitive versions of what would later be known as igloos, compact domes made of packed snow blocks. To modern eyes, it may seem impossible that snow could keep someone warm, but the cavemen understood the paradox. Snow trapped air, and air trapped heat. Inside these white chambers, insulated by the frozen world itself, they could survive nights that would kill in minutes outside. The dim light from the fire reflected off the walls, creating a strange glow, a gentle reminder that warmth could exist even inside ice. But shelters were not only physical spaces, they were emotional anchors. Within these walls of hide and stone, the tribe became family. The cries of infants mixed with the crackle of fire. The sound of tools on bone echoed softly through the dark. Outside, wolves prowled and the wind screamed. But inside, there was belonging, a fragile island of humanity in a sea of frost. They also decorated their homes in subtle ways. Symbols etched into cave walls, animal shapes drawn with charcoal and ochre. These were not mere art. They were expressions of hope, gratitude, and identity. To live through winter was to prove strength, and their shelters became monuments to that resilience. Each one told a story of struggle, of innovation, and of the enduring will to survive. In these primitive sanctuaries, surrounded by flickering light and the scent of smoke, the cavemen learned a truth that has never changed. Warmth is not only built from fire or fur, but from togetherness, the closeness of others, the shared breath of survival, the quiet strength of home. In the long, frozen silence of the prehistoric world, there existed a boundary between life and death, a line drawn by fire. Before humans learned to control it, fire was a terrifying force of nature. It consumed forests, drove beasts into panic, and lit up the night sky like a god's wrath. But once the cavemen learned to command it, to summon it from stone, feed it with breath, and guard it like a living being, the balance of the world shifted forever. Fire became not just a tool, but a companion, a spirit of warmth, protection, and transformation. For early humans, discovering fire was not a single moment, but a long journey of curiosity and observation. They saw lightning strike a tree and watched the forest burn. They noticed that when branches rubbed against each other in the wind, sometimes a spark was born. Slowly, they began to understand. Fire could be made, nurtured, and even carried. The spark of knowledge spread from one generation to another, and with it came a revolution in survival. In the deep winters, fire meant life itself. The icy wind could kill in hours, but a single flame could create a circle of safety. The cavemen built their fires carefully at the heart of their shelters, feeding them with dry wood, bark, and animal fat. They surrounded the flame with stones to hold in the heat, turning the coldest cave into a refuge. Around this flickering light, their world took shape. Warmth replaced numbness, shadows danced across the walls, and the darkness outside seemed less infinite. Yet, fire was more than warmth. It was protection. Wild animals feared it. Predators that once stalked human camps kept their distance. The glow of flames at night became a boundary, a warning line that no beast dared to cross. For the first time, humans slept without fear of claws and teeth in the dark. Fire gave them the courage to settle, to rest, and to dream. It was the first guardian spirit, a silent sentinel keeping watch over the sleeping tribe. But the power of fire reached far beyond defense. It transformed what humans could eat. Before fire, food was raw, tough, and often dangerous. Parasites and bacteria hid within flesh and roots. The discovery that fire could cook was monumental. Meat became softer, easier to chew, and far more nutritious. Roots and plants, once inedible, became safe. This change reshaped human biology itself. Our jaws became smaller, our brains grew larger, and our bodies drew more energy from less food. In a very real sense, fire didn't just feed humans, it evolved them. Cooking also changed how they gathered and lived. No longer bound to eat immediately after hunting, they could now store and preserve food by drying it near the flames. This meant more time for other pursuits, crafting tools, tending to children, creating art, and exploring. The fire gave them not just warmth, but time, and time became the soil in which culture grew. Even the act of making fire was a ritual of patience and skill. They learned to strike flint against pyrite to create sparks or spin a wooden stick into a groove until friction gave birth to flame. Every step was sacred. One careless moment could extinguish their only source of heat and safety, plunging them back into deadly cold. Thus, fire-making became a ceremonial act passed down from elder to youth, a rite of survival and reverence. To hold fire was to hold power over nature itself. Around the campfire, the tribe found its voice. The flickering light created the first stage, the first classroom, the first temple. Elders told stories, not just of hunts and beasts, but of stars, spirits, and dreams. The firelight made shadows on the walls come alive, turning storytelling into living art. Children watched with wide eyes as myths took shape, tales of the sun's journey, of animals that spoke, of ancestors who brought the flame from the heavens. Fire became deeply spiritual. It symbolized life, rebirth, and the eternal cycle of existence. Some tribes believed it was a divine gift stolen from the gods. Others saw it as a living creature that must be fed and respected. The act of lighting fire often began with prayer or chant, a promise to treat it gently. Letting the flame die was considered bad luck, even a curse. And so, they kept it alive through endless nights, feeding it like a newborn. In this way, fire became not only a source of light, but of meaning. Its glow also transformed the cavemen's relationship with the night. Before fire, darkness was absolute, a world of fear and unseen danger. But with fire, night became time for gathering, teaching, and connecting. It was no longer something to be endured, but a sacred pause in the rhythm of survival. They learned to look up at the stars while sitting by the embers, to wonder what lay beyond the fire's edge. That wonder was the first spark of philosophy, curiosity about existence itself. Fire's influence extended even to tools and technology. It hardened wooden spears, allowing hunters to pierce the hides of great beasts. It helped shape stones, bones, and later metals. The heat transformed materials just as it had transformed the human spirit. By mastering flame, early humans stepped onto the path towards civilization, from nomadic wanderers to builders, creators, and thinkers. But with power came responsibility. Fire could save, but it could also destroy. A stray ember could burn a shelter to ash, or a careless spark could ignite a forest. The cavemen learned humility from fire, respect for balance. They treated it not as a possession, but as a partnership. To live with fire was to understand that survival depended on harmony, not dominance. As centuries passed, fire remained at the heart of human life. It was there in every meal, every gathering, every story told through smoke. Even as new generations forgot the first hands that tamed it, the reverence endured. Fire became a metaphor for passion, for life, for the spirit that refused to die even in the coldest winter. In those endless ice age nights, when blizzards howled outside and the stars hid behind clouds, fire was the heartbeat of humanity. It flickered and danced, its light mirrored in human eyes, a reminder that, though fragile, they carried within them a power stronger than the storm. In taming fire, the cavemen did more than survive. They declared their place in the world. They turned chaos into warmth, darkness into memory, and fear into creation. The flame they guarded so carefully was not just a physical light. It was the beginning of human civilization, the first spark of our collective soul. When the nights stretched endlessly across the frozen earth and the stars shimmered like shards of ice, the cavemen looked to the heavens and the flames for meaning. Their lives were surrounded by mystery, death, hunger, fire, snow, the unseen powers of nature. They did not yet have science or written words, but they had stories, symbols, and rituals. These were their way of understanding the vast, unforgiving world around them, and of finding courage in the face of it. In the Ice Age wilderness, where each day balanced between life and extinction, belief itself became a survival tool. Long before temples or gods, the cavemen's religion was the world itself. They worshipped what they feared and depended upon: the fire that gave life, the beasts they hunted, the storms that roared across the mountains. They saw spirits in every element: the wind that whispered through the trees, the snow that fell silently from the heavens, and the flickering flame that seemed to breathe. When lightning struck and fire erupted from the earth, it was not chance. It was a message, a presence beyond comprehension. At the center of their spiritual world stood the fire. Every night, as darkness enveloped the world, the tribe gathered around it, the eternal heart of their existence. They believed the flame had a soul, a living energy that could feel joy and anger. It was to be fed, respected, and never left alone. To let the fire die was to offend the spirit that protected them. Some tribes even assigned a keeper of the flame, a woman, an elder, or a child chosen to watch it through the night, whispering softly to it, feeding it twigs and dried grass to keep it alive. But just as fire represented life, ice represented death, the great devourer that came each year to test their strength. The cavemen both feared and revered the winter. They saw it as a spirit of cleansing and judgment, sent by unseen powers to test who was worthy to see the spring. The snowstorms were not random. They were the breath of this cold deity, sweeping across the land to erase weakness. When a hunt failed or someone died in their sleep, they said the winter spirit had claimed its due. To survive such a world, they created rituals of balance, small, sacred acts meant to keep harmony between fire and frost, life and death. Before a hunt, The tribe would gather around the flames and mark their bodies with ash, believing it would shield them from harm. They would cast small pieces of food or fat into the fire as an offering, whispering their hopes for a successful kill. When the hunters returned, they burned part of the animal's bones, thanking its spirit for giving itself to feed the tribe. These rituals, simple as they were, carried immense psychological power. They turned fear into faith, chaos into control. The shamans, or spiritual leaders, played a vital role in this world of fire and ice. They were the keepers of the unseen, the interpreters of dreams and signs. Often marked by strange clothing, feathers, bones, and paint, they walked between the visible and invisible realms. When someone fell ill or when the hunt failed, the tribe turned to the shaman. Through chants, dances, and rhythmic drumming, they sought to speak with the spirits, to understand their anger or request their favor. In the dim glow of the cave fire, the shaman would often enter a trance, breathing in smoke, closing their eyes, and swaying to a beat that echoed like the heartbeat of the earth. Others watched in silence, feeling the air thicken with mystery. For the tribe, this was not superstition. It was participation in the rhythm of existence. They believed their actions could shift the balance between fortune and disaster. And sometimes, perhaps by coincidence or intuition, it seemed to work. The hunt would succeed. The fever would fade. The spirit of winter would retreat for a while. The cavemen also turned to symbols and art as part of their spiritual life. Deep within caves, away from the freezing wind, they painted, not for beauty, but for power. On the walls they drew bison, horses, mammoths, and hunters with spears raised high. The flickering firelight made the images come alive, the animals seeming to move across the stone. These were not mere decorations. They were acts of magic. By painting the hunt, they believed they were calling it into existence, ensuring success in the real world. Some even left handprints, made by blowing pigment over their palms pressed against the wall, a mark of identity, a declaration that I am here, I survived. Burial rituals reveal even deeper layers of belief. Archaeological discoveries show that Ice Age humans did not treat death as simple decay. They buried their dead with care, wrapped in animal hides, surrounded by tools, weapons, and sometimes even food. It was as if they believed the spirit continued its journey beyond this world. In some graves, red ochre, a natural pigment resembling blood, was sprinkled over the body. To them, it may have symbolized life's essence, a way to carry vitality into the next realm. The burial itself was an act of remembrance and continuity, proof that even amid hunger and frost, they carried compassion and hope. Some tribes performed seasonal ceremonies at key moments of the year: the first snowfall, the first thaw, or the return of migrating herds. These were times when survival depended on timing and faith. They sang primitive chants, clapped stones together, and moved in rhythmic circles around the fire. The sound echoed through the valleys, human voices rising against the silence of nature. These rituals were their way of saying, "We are still here. We endure." Over time, such spiritual expressions became a kind of moral code. They guided behavior: respect the animals you kill, care for the fire, share your food, honor the dead. These rules, though unwritten, bound the tribe together. They created social harmony and emotional resilience. In a world without law or language, belief was the glue that kept them from falling into despair. Fear was constant. Fear of cold, hunger, darkness, predators, and loss. But belief transformed fear into meaning. The cavemen did not see themselves as victims of nature, but as participants in a cosmic cycle, one where life and death were partners, not enemies. When a storm tore through their camp or an avalanche buried their path, they did not curse the elements. They listened. They adapted, prayed, and carried on. It was this psychological strength, this merging of ritual and resilience, that allowed them to survive when stronger creatures perished. The contrast between fire and ice became the foundation of their entire worldview. Fire was warmth, life, and protection, the mother that fed them. Ice was silence, death, and challenge, the father that tested them. Between the two, they learned balance. In every ritual, they sought to keep that balance. Not too much flame to burn, not too much frost to freeze. It was a philosophy older than words, passed through gestures, songs, and memories whispered in the smoke. When we look at those ancient cave paintings today, or the buried bones marked with ochre, we're seeing more than remnants of survival. We are witnessing the birth of belief, the first sparks of human imagination trying to make sense of existence. For the cavemen, these rituals and symbols were not mere customs. They were the threads that wove meaning into a world of suffering. They gave structure to chaos, community to isolation, and hope to despair. And perhaps that is why, even now, the fire still holds us in its glow. Every candle we light, every story we tell around a campfire, echoes those same ancient nights, when our ancestors sat beneath the stars, watching flames dance against cave walls, and believed for a moment that they were not alone. Through ritual and reverence, they conquered not just the cold outside, but the colder fear within. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age, where the nights stretched endlessly and death could come with a single mistake, the strongest force of survival was not fire, nor tools, nor even intelligence. It was togetherness. The cavemen learned that a lone human could not endure the cold, the hunger, or the predators that haunted the dark. But a group, a family, a tribe bound by trust and care, could. Within those primitive shelters and smoky caves, something profound was born. The earliest form of human society, where love, protection, and cooperation became the weapons that defied extinction. Family was the heart of it all. It was not just about blood relations, but about shared survival. A family, in the prehistoric world, might include a dozen or more people: parents, children, elders, and sometimes unrelated members who had joined for safety. Every person had a purpose. The elders, though slower and weaker, carried the wisdom of seasons past: what to find shelter, when to move, how to track animals, and how to treat wounds. Their memory was their tribe's library, spoken and remembered by the firelight. The children were the learners and helpers, fetching sticks, watching fires, and listening with wide eyes as the old ones told stories of beasts, storms, and spirits. The women were the quiet architects of daily survival. While men often ventured out to hunt, it was the women who held the camp together, preparing food, tanning hides, mending tools, and keeping the fire alive. They were the heart of the hearth, the keepers of continuity. When a new life was born, fragile, pink, and screaming against the cold, the entire group became protectors. Every birth was a miracle, a small victory against nature's cruelty. The mother and infant were kept close to the fire, wrapped in furs, guarded as if they were the tribe's most sacred possession, and they were. For in that child lay the tribe's tomorrow. Men were the hunters, builders, and defenders. Their role demanded strength, but also unity. A single man could not bring down a mammoth or fend off a pack of wolves. The success of every hunt depended on teamwork, trust that each would hold his place, throw his spear, and risk his life for the others. That trust was not born in words, but in experience, in shared danger, shared hunger, and shared triumph. Over time, this cooperation shaped not just how they hunted, but how they thought. The human brain itself evolved to value empathy, coordination, and loyalty because without them, the tribe would collapse. Around the fire, they shared everything: food, stories, laughter, and even silence. The fire was more than warmth. It was the center of social life, the heart of human connection. As flames flickered on the walls, the tribe became a single, breathing organism, one heartbeat, one will. Here, stories were told not only to entertain, but to teach. There were maps of knowledge, warnings of danger, and codes of behavior. Through storytelling, children learned about the sacredness of life, the dangers of arrogance, and the wisdom of patience. This oral tradition became humanity's first form of education, passed not through books, but through memory and emotion. Conflicts did exist, jealousy, competition, and fear sometimes ignited disputes. But in a world so harsh, unity was survival. The tribe developed unwritten rules. Share the kill, respect the elders, protect the weak, and never waste food. Punishment came not from violence, but from silence. Exile from the group was the ultimate death sentence. To be alone in the frozen wild was to vanish. Thus, cooperation became law, compassion became power, and family became the ultimate shelter. Even beyond survival, these early humans found meaning in connection. They grieved when one of their own died, wrapping the body with care, whispering to the fire, perhaps believing the spirit still listened. They celebrated when a child took its first steps or when the hunters returned victorious. These emotions, pride, love, sorrow, gratitude, were not luxuries but necessities. They gave purpose to suffering, warmth to hardship. Through emotion, they discovered what it meant to be human. In those icy centuries, the tribe was everything. It was warmth when fire burned low, safety when beasts roamed near, and strength when hunger struck deep. But more than that, it was the cradle of humanity, the place where empathy, cooperation, and belonging first took root. Every shared meal, every song whispered to the flames, every hand reaching out to help another, all became the invisible foundation upon which our entire species was built. And when spring finally broke through the snow, when the world began to thaw and the sun returned, it was not the strongest who had survived. It was the ones who had stayed together. Through blood, trust, and love, they conquered the cold. In the story of mankind, the first real miracle was not fire, it was family. Before there were words, before songs or names or stories, there were sounds, raw, unshaped bursts of emotion echoing through the cold air. In the dark ages of human beginnings, language was not a system, but a survival tool. It began as grunts, gestures, and cries, signals of danger, hunger, and discovery. Yet within those primitive exchanges lay the seeds of something extraordinary. From these broken sounds, the first language slowly emerged, the spark that would separate humankind from every other creature on Earth. Imagine a hunting group crouched in the snow, tracking a herd of mammoths. They cannot afford to shout or speak. A single loud noise could scatter the prey. Instead, one hunter raises his hand, another nods, a third points to the wind. Their eyes meet, understanding passes silently. These gestures were the ancestors of words. Over time, different tribes developed unique systems of sound and motion, shaped by their environment. The crack of a stick could mean danger. A low hum might mean come closer. Every successful hunt, every shared moment of fear or triumph, refined these signals until communication became second nature. At night, when they gathered around the fire, the need to share became stronger. The hunter who had seen the great beast wanted to describe it. The mother wanted to teach her child which berries were safe. The elder wanted to recall a storm that came seasons ago. But how could they pass these ideas on? Slowly, sounds began to gain meaning beyond immediate survival. A certain tone could represent water. Another could mean sun. Over generations, these sounds grew into patterns, small, consistent, and memorable. Words were born not from logic, but from emotion, the natural rhythm of breath, heart, and feeling. As language developed, the world itself changed. For the first time, humans could plan. They could imagine something not yet real and share that vision with others. They could say, "Tomorrow we hunt near the river," or "Bring wood before the snow." This ability to communicate across time, to speak of past and future, gave them power over their environment. Knowledge could now be stored not just in memory, but in speech. Ideas could move from one mind to another like fire spreading through dry grass. But words also carried beauty. They became tools for bonding. Around the fire, language wove the tribe together. People laughed, comforted, and dreamed through it. The first jokes were born, the first lullabies whispered to children, the first expressions of love spoken into the cold night. Through speech, they discovered that sound could soothe, inspire, and unite. Language became not only a means of survival, but an expression of humanity's inner world, thoughts, emotions, imagination. The elders, who once taught through imitation, now use stories. They painted images with words instead of pigments. A tale about the great bear in the sky might have been an early myth, a way to explain constellations or the changing seasons. These oral traditions carried knowledge far beyond one lifetime. Even when an elder died, their words lived on in the mouths of others. This was the first form of immortality, memory preserved through sound. The growth of language also deepened empathy. When people could name their feelings, fear, love, sorrow, they began to understand each other in ways no gesture could achieve. To say, "I am cold," or "I am hungry" was simple, but to say, "I am afraid," or "I miss you," was a revolution of the spirit. Through words, humans discovered that others felt as they did, that their pain and joy were shared. This realization bound them closer than ever before. In time, these evolving tongues shaped identity. Tribes began to sound different, their speech becoming a mark of belonging. Language became the soul of culture, a living thread that held each group together across generations. The rhythm, tone, and stories of each tribe formed its unique music. Thus, from grunts to laughter, from cries to whispers, humanity found its voice. Language turned chaos into meaning, fear into cooperation, and silence into song. It became the most powerful tool our ancestors ever created, one that built families, planned futures, carried myths, and eventually civilizations. In the cold dawn of prehistory, when words first danced on human tongues, the world changed forever. Fire gave warmth to the body, but language gave warmth to the soul.